good.
Thanks for asking.
You have anything you'd like to share this week, or would you like to take the questions?
Let's just take the questions.
Sure. So the first question is from Dhruv Agrawal.
And Dhruv, he says, Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranams. To what extent is Gaudiya Vaishnavism intertwined with Bengali culture? Is it necessary to adopt this culture to gain access into the experience?
Mm-hmm. It is intertwined to some extent, in that Gaudiya Vaishnavism appeared in West Bengal. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared there. And at the same time, its essential principles transcend any particular culture. So, for example, even in India, we find Narottam Thakur, who was in the second generation of the manifest Gaudiya Vaishnavism, canvassed widely and into Manipur. He made many disciples there. And they have their own cultural sensibilities, if you will, through which they express their Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So, for example, if you're in Vrindavan, at a time when the Manipuris come, it's obvious these are the Manipuris. Here they are. They're they have some of their culture is coming with them, of course. Excuse me. And if you look at the outreach of Bhaktivedanta Thakur, of course, he seeks to universalize the teachings or emphasize the universality of them, but of course, while being anchored at the same time to the core of the teachings. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who at Bhaktivinoda's request tried to extend the mission further beyond the borders of Bharat and so forth, he found ways to accommodate Western sensibilities with what little he had contact with. And there are some histories in that regard. And Prabhupada, my Guru Maharaj, of course, actually came to the West and to the Americas, and he adopted or adapted to the culture in ways that some of his contemporaries thought were a deviation, being more attached to Bengali cultural sensibilities than they were to the universal principles and how they could be applied in different circumstances. So in that sense, no. In another sense, yes. And with regard to the yes, I would say that there are many nice things about the Bengali culture that could be incorporated, or Indian culture in general, which is a culture that has a clear idea of the clear idea that life has purpose, meaning it culminates in transcendence. Of course, there's schools of Gyan and yoga and different traditions, but they coalesce largely in doctrines which advocate a effacing of the material ego, so forth. They're different in many respects, but they have a lot of common ground. And broadly speaking, therefore, Bharat or India has been a culture where, as I say, transcendence is clearly the goal. And that was true in the West as well, in Europe, until the time of the Enlightenment, and things started moving in a different direction where philosophy became unhinged from revelation, and that puts us. We end up where we are today in the West, kind of disenfranchised from nature. Humans living with a kind of angst and wonder as to what they are, what their purpose is, what the purpose of life is, if there is a purpose. Some advocating the no purpose, and so on and so forth. So that culture, India's culture is, as I'm speaking about it, clearly a culture that posits transcendence as the goal of life, and the fact that there's the self, different from the mind-body complex and so forth. And so there are sensibilities that go with that. Just like instead of shaking your hand, you could offer pranam like this, namaskar. Namaskar. So I think that's very beautiful. I don't think that I think that that could be incorporated into a Western culture, and you see that. You see that sometimes. This all comes from India when you see some celebrity like this folded hands and so forth. Take your shoes off before you come in the house. This is an Eastern, cultural sensibility, which is nice. So it's there are many things from a culture like the culture at the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that are useful, helpful. They make sense in relation to the ideal. Then there are things that may be cultural baggage that gets in the way and is non-essential and so forth. And these things have to be determined on an ongoing basis. But I wouldn't dismiss any cultural setting in the world on earth as, for example, the Advaita Vedanta or the Mayavad sector does. This philosophical perspective is, in this regard, is that all the cultures are just different ways of pointing to something that transcends all culture, all thought, all experience even, and culminates in contentless consciousness, which from the Vaishnava perspective makes absolutely no sense. If consciousness is not intentional, it's not of something, it has no meaning. Of something, consciousness of something. So we say, in contrast, for example, from Advaita, that of course the self is a real individual, but beyond that, that it has Gyan Swarup, or it has, to put that in English, it has knowledge of itself, awareness of itself. In this sense, the Gyan Swarup is both the subject and the object put together, right? The self is the Gyan Swarup is the knowledge that I exist. And so the Gyan Swarup is the subject and the object together. It's not contentless consciousness. It is a kind of knowledge. So the self has knowledge of itself, that I am, that I exist, rather than being inert. It's luminous. And this is where we differ from Shankar, of course, one of the ways. And of course, then along with that, we have the attribute of knowledge that discloses things about the self further, about its relationship with Bhagawan, the nature of other objects, feelings, experiences, and so forth. This is a very different idea. And in Shankar's idea, all these cultural sensibilities differences and so forth all disappear ultimately. The self, this individual self disappears, and there is just it's contentless consciousness. You might as well be, anesthetized for all intents and purposes. That's why it's described in the Pranams as being very Buddhist-like, if you will. So the Vaishnava perspective is different than that. Therefore, it gives some credibility to the cultures and the ways that are the path, and in a sense, non-different from the goal. The path is the goal. The journey is the destination, as they say. So, if there are, for example, innumerable faces of God, like the Bhagavatam says, there are Sankhya, countless, then different faces of God may pertain to different cultures where different manifestations of divinity have appeared. Bhaktivedanta Thakura, in his commentary on Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, where Krishna says, Yada yada hi dharma seglanir bhavati bharata bhutanam adharma sataratmanam Sri Jamyaham, I come again and again. He says this doesn't pertain only to India. It pertains to other cultures too, where divinity appears and as an empowered jiva to speak about the nature of divinity in terms that are relevant, to the culture and so forth. And so, like, say, for example, amongst the Catholic saints, you have archangels and whatnot, and a different kind of face of God that's not as well perhaps defined as we define or describe Narayan, but it's arguably one of his faces. And so some of the culture, if you will, the art, let's say, the drawings. You can go into the churches in Europe and see this fantastic art of angels and archangels and whatnot. I find it all very attractive. I wouldn't, just cancel all of that out, right? We say that there's that these are reflections. A genuine, ego-facing, theistic, spiritual culture in a very broad sense is bhakti, and that will correspond with a particular face of the divinity and inform, the path, and the culture will be, to some extent, an expression of that, a manifestation of that on earth. So that I think, therefore, with regard to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Bengali culture has some, let's say it's a reflection of that side of transcendence, and so some of it may be pertinent, and some of it may not. I wouldn't get. But you have to be very careful not to dismiss, head in the Mayavad direction, dismiss all cultural expressions of religion. It's ludicrous that Advaitam presents itself as being, all inclusive. It's all dismissive, if you will, of all other religious traditions in terms of what they really say. If they say transcendence is a relationship with God, Advaita says, well, maybe in an interim state on the path for those who are less intelligent and more emotional, but ultimately, no. Ultimately, there's no prem. So this is a dismissal of what they're actually speaking about. Whereas, what you're talking about, asking about, is kind of like a perennialist question. Thakur Bhaktivinoda was a perennialist, but he was not a Huxleyan perennialist. If you know Aldous Huxley coined the phrase in modern times of perennialism, and he more or less identified Advaita Vedanta as the underlying perennial philosophy that expresses itself in different cultures in different ways, and so forth, all again which dissolve when one enters into the Timingila, the mouth, the whale swallowing mouth of Dvaita Vedanta. But there's a Catholic theologian, I forget his name right now, wrote a commentary on the Gita in which he showed the differences and similarities between Advaita and Vishishta Dvaita, Shankar and Ramanuja. And he, I forget his name, forgive me, but he had also a perennialist perspective, but it was a theistic perennialist perspective, which more or less posited that transcendence, as we do, is variegated in nature. So the variegated nature of transcendence then corresponds with variegated paths, just like you have Vaidhi Bhakti as a path, Rag Bhakti as a path. So they're variegated, they're different, and they have different results in transcendence, even while they have so many things in common. So, to extend that is the idea, and honor the past, where we find, real transcendentalists in the Sufi tradition or in the, Catholic tradition, for example, real saints and so forth. You'd have to look carefully at each one and see what their conception is, how they express it, and so forth. But in this way, Bhaktivedanta Thakur was a perennialist, a theistic perennialist, if you will, embracing core perennial teachings that show up perennial forever in all traditions, even the native Aboriginal traditions and so forth. Some sense of it is there, and so forth. And then it has different varied expressions that correspond with different attainments within the variegated realm of transcendence. So, my answer is yes and no. I hope that helps.
So the next question is from Johnny.
And Johnny in Finland, he says, Krishna Nam is non-different from Krishna himself, and thus all of his lilas are present in his name. What does this really mean?
Well, let me give you a simple example. Let's say you're out and your daughter has your phone, and someone calls you, and you come home and she says, "Daddy, somebody called you," and you say, "What was his name?" "I don't know." If you got his name, then you know everything about it. Okay, you can put everything in place. So another example, in my country here in the United States, there's probably a similar thing in other countries. We have a social security number by which you can be identified. If someone gets your social security number, which is kind of a name, an identification, then they can get into your bank account. They can, take over your life, so to speak. So what's in that code, that identification code? So much is there. So these are crude examples. What's in a name? Well, there's a lot in a name, even in ordinary circumstances. If you look at here, I look out my window. There are many different trees, and if I say to you, this is a redwood tree, this is a madrone tree, and so forth. And through the name alone, I say I'm sitting here with a redwood tree. If you know through the name, you can understand what I'm seeing just by uttering the name. The name corresponds less so, if you will, with material objects, but in the spiritual context, then entirely so. So much more. So you can just extend upon that, if you will. So the name and the form, they're non-different. That would be the perfection of sound, wouldn't it? If you could think about it yourself, the extent to which a sound itself represents the object that it seeks to describe, the more the sound feels like the object, the more perfect the sound is, right? The more it's disconnected from the object, the less. So this is some ways to think about it. I hope that helps.
The next question is from Gunjan Sharma.
And Gunjan, she says, Pranams, Maharaj. If a devotee is aspiring madhurya bhav and is a disciple in the line of Srila Prabhupada, does it indicate that on achieving perfection, they will be in yutta of Sri Nayana-mani Manjari?
Nayana-mani Manjari is the name of Bhaktivedanta Swami Thakur's internal spiritual identity as a maidservant of Radha. So that's what the question Gunjan is referring to. And Prabhupada, of course, is a disciple of Bhaktivedanta Swami Thakur. He himself expressed his affinity for Sakyabhav. And if we look carefully at his writings and whatnot, we will see that his Sakyabhav is influenced by madhurya-bhav, so a type of Sakyabhav called Priyanarma Sakyabhav, friends of Krishna who participate in his romantic life, assisting him, assisting Radha, assisting the divine couple in their love life to unify, which is harder to do than you would think because of the culture of the lila. To go back to Dhruva's question, but the question, Gunjan's question is, well, what if somebody in the line coming from Prabhupada, let's say through me, for example, which would be Gunjan's case, had affinity for madhurya-rasa? Okay, that's not a problem, obviously. Every jiva has its own swabhav, her own inherent nature, right? Her, I use the term here in a tattva sense, not in a bhava or rasa sense. All the jivas are her in a tattva sense because they're all prakriti, dependent on Bhagwan, who's the Purusha. But in terms of rasa or bhava, then there'll be he's and she's. In the lila, there are cowherd boys, cowherd girls, for example. But if someone has an affinity for madhurya-rasa, like some of my disciples may have, because that is actually their swabhav, and through association, hearing, chanting, sadhana, understanding the tattva that underlies a particular rasa and so forth, this madhurya starts to resonate with them in this life and from past lives and so forth. It's it awakening or rising. Then the question is will that devotee who has affinity for madhurya-rasa be in the group of Nayana-mani Manjari, the group of that Bhaktivedanta Swami Thakur is in? Of course, he's in the group of Rupa Manjari. Therefore, that type of bhakti is called Rupa Anuga, following Rupa. There's two ways in which the word Rupanuga can be understood. It originally comes from Raghunath Das Goswami, I think his last verse of his Manasiksha. And he is, of course, a follower of Rupa Goswami. He was initiated by Yadunandan Acharya, his Siksha Guru, appointed, if you will, by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Swarup Damodar Goswami. With the passing of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Swarup Damodar, he went to Vrindavan. The idea of committing suicide by jumping off of Govardhan Hill, a form of Vaishnava suicide. He couldn't tolerate living without Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Swarup Damodar, but Rupa Sanatan stopped him. And he has a prayer, beautiful prayer to Sanatan Goswami that speaks about this. And he came under their tutelage there in Vrindavan. And he's a follower of Rupa Goswami. As a follower of Rupa Goswami, at the same time, Raghunath Das finds himself, you see, it's complicated, but Rupa Manjari is a Manjari. So along with the Manjaris or the maidservants of Radha, there are the friends of Radha like Vishaka and Alita. So Raghunath Das Goswami, who coined the term Rupanuga, what he meant there is following Rupa Goswami in teaching of Rasa Tattva, Bhakti Tattva, and also Rupa Manjari in terms of bhava. The broader sense is Rupanugas if we follow the teachings of Rupa Goswami, but in a more in a full sense, in Raghunath Das Goswami's sense, then to follow the same bhava as Rupa Goswami. But if following the same bhava as Rupa Goswami, so someone who has such madhurya-rasa affinity would be a member of the Rupa Goswami's group, which Bhaktisiddhanta is a member of, which Bhaktivedanta Thakur is a member of. Now, within that, of course, you have Raghunath Das Goswami. He's a follower of Vishaka, as is Krishnadas Kaviraj. Some are followers within Rupa's group of Lalita on the other side. So there's a number of things to consider, but perhaps I'm going too far with it. The answer is yes. You will be in the same group as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, which is Rupa Goswami's group. If you're a cowherd friend, then you'll be in the same group as Prabhupada, no doubt. This likely. Let's put it like this. It's likely. Everyone has their own swabhav, and it's not that someone from a different group cannot help one who has a swabhav that will result in another group. And all these groups, they're one big group. So that's what I like to say. Krishna has fallen in love with the sisters of all of his friends. So these boys and girls are very well connected, if you will, in the Leela. Hope that helps.
So the next question is from Raj Balavi in Poland.
Raj Balavi from Poland, okay.
Yes, she asked last week, actually. She says, Radhe Radhe, I noticed that you're wearing a light tilak now. Is that related to your mood or something else?
It is, yes. For some time I was wearing Syama-kunda tilak. Syama-kunda tilak is tilak from Syama-kunda, which is next to Radha-kunda. And Syama-kunda tilak is I'd say a little more relevant to Krishna's friends than Radha-kunda. Krishna's intimate friends, of course, will come to Radha-kunda, but Krishna's other friends will probably approach only as far as Syama-kunda. So I was wearing Syama-kunda tilak. But my inner guide advised me of late, recently, that reminded me that there's no closer that one can get to Krishna than the closeness one has to one's guru. And so, of course, I know that, but to have that prompt to me, it said, oh, I should wear gopi-candana tilak because Prabhupada wore gopi-candana. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wore gopi-candana tilak. Bhaktivedanta Thakur wore gopi-candana tilak. Gopi-candana tilak is also mentioned in Raghavartma Chandrika of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He says that he speaks about tilak as an aspect of Raganuga Bhakti and its importance. And he mentions it as gopi-chandan. I don't remember if Hari Bhakti Vilas mentions gopi-chandan. Prabhupada would know. Yes, I thought it did. Thank you for the thumbs up on that. It's vertical urdhva pundra and gopi-chandan. So this is anything after that, of course, is, well, it's not bad. It's said that in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that when Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya Dev, went to Vrindavan, he found Radha-kund. I think he decorated himself with mud from Radha-kund. So that could be a reference for making tilak out of mud from Radha-kund, for example, which many devotees do. But and that said, of course, at a certain point in time, the Goswami families, if you will, Brahmins who adopted the name Goswami as a way, as I look at it, as a way of saying, you know, we're the followers of Rupa Goswami or the Goswamis. They gave some more shape to the teachings of Rup and Sanatan. And one of the things that they did was to determine how they did it, I'm not sure, a particular tilak for the followers of Advaita, the followers of Nityananda, the followers of Gadadhar, the followers of this paribar or that paribar. So in Vrindavan, you'll find Shyamananda paribar has its own tilak, and Advaita paribar has its own tilak. Nityananda paribar has its own tilak. They call it tilak svarupa. It's a nice idea, but it's a detail, if you will. Unfortunately, over time, many persons affiliated with those lineages have come to think that it's a principle, and that if you don't have a tilak svarupa from one of the paribars that originates from one of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates, then you're not going to be able to enter into the spiritual world. So that does not correspond with the teachings of Hari Bhakti Vilas or the teachings of Raghavartma Chandrika, which is a book particularly about Rag Bhakti, for example. It's the turning of or conflating a detail, and a nice one, into a principle, which takes the beauty out of it, if you will, and cements one into a kanishta, neophyte orientation, the one that Bhaktivedanta Thakura spoke out about with his term Bharamahi as opposed to Saragrahi. He advocated Saragrahi Vaishnavism. Sara means essence. Cream, it means cream rises to the top, right? When we were young, when I was young, we used to have milkmen that came around and delivered milk from different, dairies in milk bottles. And then the mothers would look and see which milk had more cream on the top, and they would, go to that dairy. So the cream rises to the top. So Saragrahi, right, in his essence-seeking Vaishnava, and as opposed to a Bharavahi, who he said carries the burden of sectarian, and to go back to Dhruva's question, cultural sensibilities, as if they were absolutes and essentials, and you have to wear this particular color, and that, and this, and so forth. And otherwise, you're not going to go back to God. And I mean, this just doesn't resonate with a sense of the universality of spirituality, if you will. So at the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his disciples were wearing, I guess, a generic form of urdhva pundra with gopi-chandan, vertical tilak, as opposed to the horizontal tilak of the Shaivites in gopi-chandan. And some devotees of other paribars who had their Nityananda paribar tilak or their Advaita paribar tilak, and they were familiar with the tilaks of the different paribars and could identify, oh, he's from Advaita paribar, he's from the Nityananda paribar. They asked Bhaktisiddhanta disciples, which paribar are you from? Because they couldn't, identify, from the tilak. So when those disciples asked Bhaktisiddhanta, he said, tell them Bhakti Vinod Paribar, which is his bold statement, the Bhakti Vinod Paribar. So we're doing as Bhakti Vinod is doing. That's his idea. The idea that a paribar could be named after someone who's not an eternal associate who appeared in the Leela of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has, of course, precedent, because we see the Narottam Paribar, the Syama-kunda Paribar. These are both paribars who are named after associates who were in the second generation, and named so because in the case of Narottam, because of the wide and breadth of his campaign, which was extraordinary, while Lokanath Goswami, the founder of the paribar, so to speak, his guru, had only one disciple who was Narottam. In the case of Syama-kunda, we have an extraordinary internal spiritual event in his life that caused us to refer to his paribar. He was initiated in the paribar coming from Haridas Pandit, that we call it the Syama-kunda paribar. So there's precedent for naming a paribar after a prominent person in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, in our time. Bhaktivedanta was initiated in the what is it called? Paribar, anyway, coming from Janava, Bhagnapar, from Bhagnapar, the line, coming from Janavadev, the consort of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, a form of the Nityananda paribar. But he wore a certain tilak, which is kind of generic and gopi-candana. So anyway, I was prompted from within to change my course and decorate myself with tilak of gopi-candana, as Prabhupada did, as Sridhar Maharaj did, as Bhaktisiddhanta did, and as Bhaktivinoda did, and I feel very good about that. Bhaktivinoda Paribar Ki Jai. It's a beautiful thing. What else?
The next question is from Amrita Radhe Devidasi.
And she says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for your enlightening talks and association through these videos. The following is my question. From studying Srila Prabhupada's books, your books, and from hearing from other glorious Vaishnavas, I have come to the understanding that the soul, or jiva, is responsible for her desires. The material mind carries impressions from past births and can influence these desires. Through the association of devotees, and by rendering services of which chanting the holy names with the attitude of service is primary, one is able to replace material desires by spiritual desires, and thereby eventually awaken desires to eternally serve Radha Syama as per her eternal svarupa. Is that the correct understanding? Please guide. Your humble servant, Amrita Rai.
Yes. Thank you for the question. Yes, that's correct. The jiva has will. And if it didn't, that would be a problem. So it does, but that's also a problem. Because if we have will, which means the freedom of choice, then for that to be meaningful, we have to be able to choose the wrong thing at times. And unfortunately we do, because we're weak, we're small, and our will is not fortified by spiritual association. So we make wrong choices. You can't make a square in a circle, so you can't ask God to make a square circle. That doesn't make any sense. So you can't ask God to give the most valuable thing, if you will, the freedom that he himself has in his expansions, to his expansions, the many, the one becoming many, in this world, as Mahavishnu, his jurisdiction expands into many. You can't ask him to give that freedom and then not, well, it would be meaningless if they could not choose the wrong thing. So they do, sometimes we do. That's our predicament, yes. And that predicament, those choices, of course, become reinforced. So when we make choices consistently in a certain way, then from a time without beginning, then the samskars form that then tend to take over, and the will of the jiva in material life can become more and more suppressed. And the self can become more and more removed, if you will, from the picture. And material nature is just functioning like a machine. And the fact that it depends upon you is lost on you, and what you are is lost. So that's obviously the problem of material life. And the material samskars, impressions, they foster like a wind behind us, choosing again the same thing, choosing again the same thing, choosing again the same thing. But the will is there, and by good association, of course, spiritual association, one can begin to choose in a spiritual direction. And so, as we do so, we, the thoughts come in the mind to do something, but we can make a decision, not to do them. Why? Because we've heard, and we can also experience that I did that didn't work out very well. Still, I do it again. After a while, you might get tired of that, but by good association and siksha and so forth, then you can determine with spiritualized, if you will, intellect, that my mind says this would be good, but my intelligence says it's not good for me. So there's an example. Do you have a will? Well, you have a won't. I won't do that, which is a negative expression of a will. There have been experiments, scientific experiments in this regard also, that certain idea, a desire manifests in the mind, and the person says no, and the brain doesn't light up, which indicates that the choice no is not a function of the brain. It's independent of the brain. This is part of a long and extended and good argument for free will. That it's an argument, part of a discussion that shows, interestingly enough, evidence of persons with major portions of their brain not existing from birth. Whole hemispheres, and still they're just normal people making choices. So anyway, we do have some will, but it gets covered by material nature. But by good association, our intelligence can be spiritualized. We can learn to make the right choices, and as we do, of course, then what happens first is that the material samskars, they are cleansed away. This is what Mahaprabhu is talking about when he says Cheta Darpana Marjanam. By Nam Sankirtan, the Cheta, the organ of awareness, it's like this antakara in the subtle body has Chitta, which is expressed as buddhi, manas, and ahankara. So Chitta means, as I've said before, there's a sound, you become aware of it. I'm aware of the sound. With buddhi, I can determine it's the sound of a flute. With my mind, I can determine I like it or I don't like it, right? So the chitta is where all these impressions are stored. So Mahaprabhu says, Cheta Darpana Margam, this Cheta, this Chitta, which is Prabhupada calls it material consciousness. It's like a reflection of real consciousness. Subtle or psychic matter has the power to reflect consciousness proper. It's quasi-subjective, so to speak. So this first order of business, if you will, is the cleansing of the chitta. So to cleanse away those samskars, those impressions. And in the context of bhakti, they're being replaced with spiritual impressions, spiritual vrittis, which are impressions. A like number of vrittis forms a samskar. And when a samskar matures, it's a vasana. It turns into a psychological disposition. So we're replacing, doing away with the material samskars. They're being replaced with spiritual samskars. And they could be general, but in time they become more specific as the self starts to arise out. And then there's the self finding itself liking this particular section of the Bhagavatam and these lilas and so forth. And then using those sections to hear repeatedly, reflect upon, and nourish the liking that one has inherently in one's svabhav. Now, these samskars are corresponding with this, with the svabhav and the individuality of the jiva. So, I've given the example. I think Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the example. If you want water, you have to dig a well. Well, so does the digging create the water, or does the water create the digging? The water really creates the digging. If there were no water in the ground, it wouldn't dig. So the svabhav creates the samskars, particular impressions. Two devotees, same external influence, will get different impressions based on their own individuality. Here the external influences, hearing the Bhagavad Shravan, for example, hearing the Bhagavatam. So in Bhaktivedanta Thakur's Jaiva Dharma, two disciples, same guru. Guru said, you've been doing Bhagavad Shravan for some time. They're fixed up now. They have nishta. He asks, what about ruchi? What is your ruchi? And one says, I like these chapters. I like the idea of following Subhal. And when a calf runs away from the herd, with his permission, going to bring him back to Krishna, something like that. The other disciple says, I like the gopi bhav and so forth. So the guru blesses them, he understands, they understand tattva, and so forth. And similarly, at the end of Gopal Champu, which tells the Prakat Lila very, very beautifully and poetically, Jiva Goswami says at the end, so I've told, basically, I've showcased the different aesthetic raptures of Braj, Vatsalya, Sakya, Madhurya. So the one that resonates with you, then use those chapters to help bring it out, if you will, is the idea. But we have to, and you've pointed this out, Amrit, and that's good, that choosing, if you will, is in a real sense is largely arising out of a condition in which the material samskars have been considerably put aside or removed. Now, it could arise out of good association, strong preaching that makes it clear to one who's listening. Theoretically, then, could say, I like madhurya bhav, and Guru may say, yes, that's good. But now, the focus is here where you want to go, but you have to focus where you are now and pay attention to the cleansing of the samskars and so forth. Look at your material samskars as objects rather than the subject. We misconstrue the samskars that cause us to act, materially speaking, that cause us to act in a certain way as if they're us, who is the subject. They're not us. They're objects that are, so we have to learn to separate ourselves from those things. That's not me. That's not me. And then we can say no to those things, move aside from those things. And then you can see I'm building something here. I'm taking that off, removing that burden. And I'm getting spiritual strength from that. Every time I say no to that, and I identify it for what it is, it's not favorable to bhakti. It's not helping me. This is the hard work of sadhana. This is putting in the foundational stones, if you will, to building the house of bhakti. So we want to be careful. And your question indicates that you are in a thoughtful way and that you thought about it properly. But we want to be careful, not to think I want to be a gopi and forget about where you are now and what you have to do at the moment, if you will, to make that all possible. So I hope that helps. But I appreciate your question, and yes, your explanation was in line with the teachings.
Thanks, Guru Maharaj. So just before the next question, I've just been asked to remind you, if you could just speak a little slower for the translators. I'll try and remind you at the start next week. But the next question is from Parananda, who's a friend of Prem in Poland.
So, so this is the question. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, verse 7, Krishna says, "One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul, and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled." Why did Haridas Thakur, Prahlada Maharaj, and other pure devotees have enemies, demons, who caused them suffering and wanted to kill them? Thank you.
It's one of the qualities of bhakti that manifests in the stage of sadhana is, there's two of them, the removal of suffering, which comes from attachment, and shubhata. Developing auspicious qualities, for example, like those of the devas and more, and thereby becoming attractive to everyone. So same idea. Well, apparently everyone doesn't include everyone entirely, although it does in another sense, and that is that if you have an enemy, that person is attracted to you negatively. So you can't ignore, therefore, someone who has shubhata, who has developed even this far in sadhana in relation to bhakti. You either like him or her, or in contact with then you don't like, you can't be indifferent. Liking or not liking means that you're attractive to them. Let's say Hiranyakasipu was attracted to Prahlada. He gave all of his attention to him. He couldn't think of outside of that. He had to change his son. If he was indifferent to his son, then he wouldn't have cared. It's said, for example, about the disciple. The disciple should be concerned that my guru either praises me or chastises me, but pray that he or she is not indifferent to me. In this case, of course, the guru chastises for the sake of improving the disciple. Prabhupada was very pleased to explain and to relate to an occasion when he was publicly chastised by Bhaktivedanta Swami Thakur for something that he didn't do. And the person next to him was doing. Prabhupada was so pleased that he was called. I said, the Guru Maharaj thought so much of me that in public he called me out and chastised me. So something like that, I think, is the way to harmonize that. I hope that helps. Negative attraction, positive attraction.
So the next question is from Matthew T.
And I think if he's on the call, I think he said that he will ask himself.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, if he's...
Yeah, please, Matthew, if you're there.
I think I saw that he joined.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Maharaj. Glad to see you're feeling better.
Thank you.
My question is, in the intro to the Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada states that karma is not eternal, whereas the other four main truths of the Gita are. When karma is discussed, does it only reference the specific actions of jivas within the earthly realm? It seems that if time and prakriti are eternal, that there would also be eternal activities.
Yes, I understand your question. Karma is beginningless. Excuse me, like the jiva is beginningless, but it can come to an end. That means that the individual karma of you can come to an end. The jiva's individual karma can come to an end, but karma goes on in the broader sense. So there's no end to material existence. How many jivas are there in the material world? Infinite. So this is a particular lila, Bhagavan, the Shrishti lila. It goes on again and again and again. It contracts and it expands, it contracts and it expands. And in the course of the contraction and expansions, one jiva comes out, ends karma, another, something like that. So karma in relation to the jiva, the individual jiva, can end. But karma as a principle in the world is perpetual, right? There can't be a world without karma, right? The material world without karma. It's what makes the whole thing go round. So it's just as much as material existence will never come to an end, so karma will never come to an end in that sense. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay, very good. What else?
So you like to take one more, Guru Maharaj?
Yeah, we have a couple minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so the questions from Braj Sundari.
And Brajasundari says that you quote Jiva Goswami in the Circle of Friends, saying that Nam Smaranam is not as effective as Nam Kirtan. I'm not sure I fully understand why. And is there always a difference between them? Like, for instance, how would Mahamantra Smaranam be different from attentive silent japa? Could you explain it further, please? Thank you.
Well, silent japa, of course, japa is a sub-limb of the limb of smaranam. So so chanting the Maha Mantra silently is a form of smaranam. Now, sometimes we chant it out loud, and that's called, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that's referred to as Sankirtan. Haridas Thakur, for example, is repeatedly, his chanting is repeatedly termed Sankirtan. So apparently he was doing japa out loud. Now, some say he did 300,000 names a day, which is 3 lakhs, if you will. He did 1 lakh silently, 1 lakh whispering that he could hear and no one else could hear, and 1 lakh loudly. So the virtues of chanting out loud, of course, are said to be, for example, that not only the individual chanting benefits, but other people hear the name and benefit. And if you benefit others, you benefit. So there's a double benefit for you. Such as, these are ways of talking about the virtues of kirtan. This is the age of, kirtan's time. So you have to give him his place. here, kirtan of the name, as being the anga above all other angas. And it has greater power, you could say, at least in Kali Yuga. So, so there's a difference between smaranam and a difference between kirtanam. They're two different angas. And I would say that this also, that if you do kirtan of the holy name, which can be just chanting japa out loud, then you will enter into smaranam of your svarupa. Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur, who sat down to chant 1 billion names of Krishna, afterwards wrote this poem, Vaishnav K, which I often quote a line from. He says, Kirtana Prabhave Smarana Swabhave. So the Smarana Swabhave means to meditate on one's swabhav. He says this will come about by the force, Prabhave Kirtana, by the force of kirtan. He used to say that Gorkashodas Babaji Maharaj told him, you will realize your swarup in the syllables of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Fair enough. So, so he came out of his bhajan with an advocacy of kirtan, and he launched into a wide campaign that even included referring to the printing press as the Brihat Mridanga, the big drum, as a dynamic expression of kirtan and so forth. Broadcasting the teachings and whatnot. If you, by the force of kirtan, enter into smaranam, which should be the natural result of due course, and firstly, as we were speaking earlier, the material samskars will be cleansed and so forth. Then when you go deep into smaranam, which is central to rag bhakti, that smaranam will also be fortified and nourished by kirtan, And when the smaranam becomes perfect, one will find oneself in the lila, and at least on occasion, doing kirtan. Jai Ram, Jai Krishna, Jai Radha. So we find the gopis, for example, in the Prakat Lila doing kirtan on the banks of the Jamuna after Krishna disappeared, and he also with Radha, and then he disappeared from Radha. They found Radha. They went to the bank of the kirtan of the Jamuna, and they did kirtan. Well, maybe not Nam Kirtan, but Nam Kirtan is certainly a feature of Goloka. So inside of Smaranam, outside of Smaranam, there is kirtan that leads to Smaranam, and the Smaranam leads to kirtan. The different levels of kirtan. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by the force of his own kirtan, became unconscious and really jumped into the ocean, thinking it was the Jamuna, and was caught by a fisherman. And the devotees went and found him on the beach in a fisherman's net. And Swarup Damodar organized a kirtan to bring Chaitanya Mahaprabhu out of his internal absorption. And when he came to external consciousness, he said, "What happened? Somebody made a noise and disturbed took me out of my service meditation." So Sridhar Maharaj used to like to remark that he referred to the kirtan of Swarup Damodar as noise. So what to speak of the kirtan inside of the meditation itself, singing the names of Radha and Krishna. So I hope those are some thoughts that serve as an answer to your question, the details of which all I can't remember at this moment, but I think it should cover it. And with that, we've crossed over the time limit. So I appreciate being with all of you, and you're taking the time to listen and ask questions. I hope to be with you again next week. Gaur Nityananda ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivedanta ki jai,
Jai.
Gaur Premanande,
Haribo.
Hari Haribo.
Srila Guru Maharaj ki jai. So we have an announcement this week. So a week Monday, Monday 1st of December, is going to be Gita Jayanti. And so Krishna Kanaya is like she has been for quite a number of years now, arranging for a Zoom call. So if anybody would like to get together to read the Gita, it'll be Monday, December 1st. So it'll be 12 o'clock noon, I guess, Eastern time. I think that's 9 a.m. Pacific time, and 6 o'clock European time, Central European time. So 5 o'clock UK time. Many times, but there's a poster there in the Facebook group and that kind of thing. Or you can reach out if you need any more details. But yeah, just same login with Zoom, and I'll try and remember to remind everybody at the end of next week's call. But apart from that, we're through all the questions. So if anybody has any questions, do let us know, and we can add you to the list for next week. We can think of lots of questions for next week. And I hope you have a lovely week. Hare Krishna.
Jai Gauranga.